For years now, we've heard about corruption in the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. This is money that's taken from the pews and redistributed through grant programs to ministries, apostolates, groups who are supposed to promote the Catholic Church and to help those who are in need. However, it's been shown that much of this money is going to causes that do not conform to Catholic teaching. Today, I'm talking with Michael Hichborn. He's really the lion when it comes to this topic. Michael Hichborn is the founder and president of the Lepanto Institute. He's a well-known public figure in the pro-life movement, and he spent 7.5 years as the American Life League director of the Defend the Faith Project. In this capacity, Michael has researched and produced an annual report on organizations receiving grant money from the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. This annual report exposes dozens of grantees that are promoting abortion, birth control, homosexuality, and Marxism, and has led to a nationwide review of the CCHD, that's the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, and a tightening of its guidelines. In addition to his work as the director of the Defend the Faith, Michael hosts an online video series, the American Life League Report. Michael Hichborn, welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Taylor. It's great to be here.
We met in person for the first time about a month ago, but I've admired your work for years now. And, I got to say, I first heard about this maybe only like 3 or 4 years ago was it brought to my attention. And it's been sort of a secret, but over the years you've been exposing this, and God bless you for it. How did this campaign, it used to be called just the Campaign for Human Development, right? And then they added the word Catholic to it. What's the origin of this? Where's it coming from?
So the Catholic Campaign for Human Development was developed in the late 60s, and it didn't become a national collection until the mid to late 70s. But it was really the brainchild of two individuals, a guy named Monsignor Jack Egan and his very good friend, Saul Alinsky. Now, I'm sure that you and many of your listeners know who Saul Alinsky is. Alinsky, he wrote Rules for Radicals. He wrote Reveille for Radicals. The whole process of community organizing really is his brainchild. In the 1940s, Alinsky formed what's called the Industrial Areas Foundation. That was kind of the bedrock, the very first of a rash of community organizing groups. And they're all based on this idea of class warfare, social political agitation, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I've always, Saul Alinsky sometimes distanced himself from full-out communism, so I've always thought of him as sort of soft socialism. Do you think that's correct?
I don't.
You don't?
No, not at all. If you look back to some of the things that he wrote, I'll just read you a little bit here. So he wrote this was in an interview that he gave with Playboy magazine. He said, "I knew plenty of communists in those days and worked with them on a number of projects. Back in the 30s, the communists did a hell of a lot of good work. They were in the vanguard of the labor movement, and they played an important role in aiding blacks and Okies and Southern sharecroppers. Anyone who tells you he was active in progressive causes in those days and never worked with the Reds is a GD liar. Their platform stood for all the right things." I mean, no, This guy was a communist. He may have distanced himself from communism, but if you read this whole interview, the whole idea of communism was very much embedded into everything that he did.
Yeah. And his book, the 1971 book, was dedicated to the greatest rebel organizer of all time, Lucifer.
Right. Yeah. So it was probably a tongue-in-cheek reference, but Alinsky was once asked if he was ever afraid of going to hell because of the things that he was doing. And he said, well, if I get down there, I'll just organize the inmates there too.
Yeah.
That was his attitude.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really troubling to me, I've been working on this book on infiltration in church. It covers a lot of the stuff that you cover. But Jacques Maritain, the French philosopher who claimed to be a Thomist, was a friend of Saul Alinsky, actually encouraged him to publish the rules And he even arranged a meeting with Montini, pre-Paul VI, Pope Paul VI.
That's right.
Saul Alinsky, listen to this, folks. This is a red pill. Saul Alinsky met with Cardinal Montini, not Martini, Cardinal Montini in 1958 3 times.
Yep.
And Saul Alinsky's on record saying in the 1958 conclave, I don't know who will be the next pope, but if it's Montini, I'm buying everyone drinks.
Wow.
Saul Alinsky said that. So he wanted Montini to be the next pope because he saw him having the same outlook.
Right.
And Montini didn't become pope in 58, but he did become pope in 63. He's Paul VI. Yep. So that's scary. I mean, I wasn't really aware that he had actually met with Saul Alinsky.
I had a photograph somewhere. I was doing some research on Saul Alinsky years ago, and I found a photograph somewhere online of Saul Alinsky with Jack Egan. And in the article, it talked about him meeting with Montini.
Yeah. So that's crazy.
Oh, yeah.
So all of this goes back to the brainchild of Saul Alinsky, which is a way in America of community organizing. And we know Barack Obama was a community organizer.
Yep.
And we all kind of chuckle like, well, what does that mean? What does a community organizer do? But Saul Alinsky tells us what a community organizer does, right?
Absolutely. Rules for Radicals and Reveille for Radicals was basically the blueprint for community organizing. The idea was that you would take the have-nots, you would organize them in a way to do political, not riots. He wasn't calling for riots, but it was basically like political showboating. One of the examples that he gave was to take a bunch of homeless people, feed them a bunch of refried beans, and then have them do a sit-in in a political chamber somewhere, so that they were, filling the air with a bad stench. Yeah, but I mean, I have to give him the props for the sense of humor. But the point is that it was all political agitation. If you want to understand the bitter fruits of this, I'll give you a good example. One of the organizations that the CCHD funds is called the Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition. We are currently working on an updated report on this particular group. But in 2014, right when I was just starting the Lepanto Institute, I did a profile on this group because there was a guy who went and shot and killed 2 cops in New York. And he said on his Facebook page that he was putting wings on pigs today. Take one of ours. Let's take 2 of theirs. Shoot the police, etc. I mean, it was all this anti-police rhetoric. All of this was in response to alleged police violence, the death of Mike Brown. I think you probably remember that incident. The death of Eric Gardner. So those were the things that were fueling his rage. He did not know these people. He had no personal interaction with either Mike Brown or Eric Gardner. So something stirred up in him a desire to commit violence against the police. Well, while after those 2 individuals were killed in police-related incidents, and we're not talking about whether the cops were right or wrong in this particular instance, but what we can say is that the rhetoric that came from the Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition, by the way, their logo is the raised fist, the raised clenched fist, which is the sign of socialism. They went around with signs. They put together rallies, and they fueled the flames for this anti-police sentiment, talking "I can't breathe" and putting signs up that say "I can't breathe" and say standing up for Eric Gardner and stop police brutality and that kind of thing. All of that rhetoric is what led to this individual to go and shoot a couple of police officers. So when you look at the political agitation that is being conducted by grantees of the Campaign for Human Development. It's all a part of the revolutionary process of destabilizing the citizenry and breaking down morale.
Right, right. So it's a subtle revolution, and I mean it's not that subtle. You got refried beans in the sit-in, but
Right.
but it's not a Saul Alinsky's never was a openly violent revolution.
Right. So he wasn't specifically calling for armed revolt, but he was agitating for what would later become armed revolt.
Yeah, yeah. So it's sort of a passive aggressive, subtle organizing skills that Saul Alinsky popularizes, like you said, put out the game plan, the handbook on it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is pretty effective because it's really an infiltration.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And another thing Saul Alinsky bragged about was going back, I think he says, maybe to the 30s, but definitely in the 40s, him working with clergy, Protestant and Catholic. And he even mentions, I believe by name, working with monsignors or hierarchs in Chicago.
Yes. So he started what was called the Back of the Yards, what was it, Back of the Yards Foundation, or the Back of the Yards, it was the Back of the Yards something or other. And with that organization, he was working closely with priests and local Catholic communities, because a lot of the people that were working the rail yards were Catholics. They were members of Catholic parishes. What he saw was an opportunity here, because he recognized that a lot of Catholics very dutifully tithed to their local churches. And because of those tithes, he saw an opportunity to say, hey, why don't we organize you guys, maybe get some funding from your local parishes so that we can, get workers' rights for, and I'm not going to say that there weren't abuses, and I'm not going to say that there weren't, abuses. I can't think of another word, going on with regards to the injustices of not paying workers a fair wage and that kind of thing. I'm not going to say that wasn't happening, but what Alinsky did is he saw the opportunity with the Catholic Church to say, we're going to go ahead and start funding our little community organizing efforts to combat this injustice, which then allowed him to establish an organization, which then suddenly had power. And that power is what he was seeking. He wasn't really seeking the justice, he was seeking the power.
Right. Classic communist power play.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Everyone's equal, but we get to be a little bit more equal up towards the top. Yeah.
Yep.
So how does all this relate to the Catholic campaign for human development? It seems that this model that Alinsky created proliferated, and then somehow the Catholic Church ended up paying the bill for it.
Absolutely. So in the 1940s, Alinsky formed what was called the Industrial Areas Foundation. That group is now a network of community organizing groups, and the Industrial Areas Foundation actually is one of the largest networks to receive annual funding from the CCHD. So oops, sorry about that. My computer decided to update just now. The Industrial Areas Foundation network annually receives anywhere from $4 to $5 million in CCHD grants every year, which is roughly a third of all of the overall grants. From the Industrial Areas Foundation, there came several other agencies that also receive funding from the CCHD, like the Gamaliel Foundation, the Midwest Academy until recently, the Pacific Institute for Community Organizing, which is also called PICO. That is a large network of groups that receive CCHD funding. And another one called Direct Action and Research Training Center, or DART for short. All of those were created by Saul Alinsky and the Industrial Areas Foundation. From there, after he created...
Do you mind if I interrupt real quick? It seems that these community organizers are just making all of these little groups. They just love doing that.
Yep. Well, Acorn, you remember Acorn?
Yep.
That was one of the largest, and it got defunded by the CCHD, I think, in 2008, not because they were doing anything immoral, like going out and telling people they should be getting abortions, but because, some of the people at the top were skimming off the top. It was the embezzlement that got them defunded, not the abortion. So the CCHD, like I said, it came into existence in the late 60s. In 1954, that's when Saul Alinsky met Jack Egan. They became lifelong friends. And it was in 1969 that Egan and Alinsky went to the Archdiocese of Chicago and said, we would like to get diocesan funding for these community organizing groups. And so they were able to secure about $150,000 for the Industrial Areas Foundation. And that was just one collection,
Back in that day.
Yep.
It's a lot of money.
And it's interesting because when you look at what Alinsky wrote in Rules for Radicals, he actually talked about his work with the Catholic Church and how he would slowly allow for things like abortion and contraception to be introduced to this. Here's what he says. I'm just going to read you a very short bit here. He says, one of the factors that changes what you can and can't communicate is relationships. There are sensitive areas that one does not touch until there is a strong personal relationship based upon common involvements. Otherwise, the other party literally turns off and does not hear, regardless of whether your words are within his experience. Conversely, if you have a good relationship, he is very receptive, and your message comes through with a positive context. And here's where he talks about abortion. He says, for example, I have always believed that birth control and abortion are personal rights to be exercised by the individual. If in my early days, when I organized the Back of the Yards neighborhood in Chicago, which was 95% Roman Catholic, I had tried to communicate this, even though the experience of the residents whose economic plight was aggravated by large families, that would have been the end of my relationship with the community.
Wow.
That instant, I would have been stamped out as an enemy of the church and all communication would have ceased. And I'm not going to read the rest of it, but he later goes into how after establishing a relationship with the Catholic Church in Chicago, he actually sat there and talked to the chancellor in his office and made a crack about birth control, and the chancellor kind of laughed about it. So he was all about establishing relationships and trying to make sure that if you're going to affect change, you can't just have these agitation and organization. It's all about establishing relationships, which, ironically enough, is what the CCHD does when it goes out and gives grants to these groups. They develop a relationship and they wind up liking these people. And I'll tell you, I've had a number of meetings with CCHD staff where they're like, oh, I know so-and-so. Oh, they're such a good person. We get along very well. They wouldn't do anything like that, except they do.
Saul Alinsky, it's diabolically brilliant.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, there's a reason why all of mankind fell after having a dialogue.
Yes, dialogue with the demon.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, I just want to go back to what we started at the beginning. It bothers me so deeply that Paul VI met with this man 3 times before becoming Pope. I mean, this shows that infiltration, it wasn't just happening in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
This is really as we're seeing, as the weeks and months go by since the Summer of Shame, this is a global problem. Saul Alinsky was not alone. It's an international community organizing event.
Well, and it's also interesting that it wasn't until Pope Paul VI that we saw an explosion of social justice programs cropping up in the church, not just in the United States. It had already been happening in the church in the U.S., but then it really started popping up abroad after that.
Yeah. I mean, Credo for the People of God, Paul VI, that was written by Jacques Maritain, who's a good buddy of Saul Alinsky.
Yep.
So it's connected.
Absolutely. All the social justice garbage that we're fighting right now. I mean, there was a priest, Father Coughlin, who was based out of Detroit in Michigan. And he was fighting against certain forms of injustice within the industrial community. And he wasn't wrong. but he was pushing this idea of social justice, which fed the fuel for this whole community organizing nonsense. He was against socialism, and he really hated the idea of communism, but what he was pushing, this false idea of justice and organizing, is what led to the revolts that would come later. And he came to lament some of the things that he had said later on in life, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so that brings us up to what year was that when Alinsky was meeting with the Chicago Chancery and all that?
So that was 69.
Okay.
1969 is when the CCHD met with the Chancery in Chicago, and it was Cardinal Bernadine.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise.
He was Bishop Bernadine, brought it to Chicago. In Chicago, later on, Bernadine proposed it as a national collection to the NCCB, which was the National Catholic Conference of Bishops.
Which is the prototype to the USCCB. Right,
the predecessor. And so he proposed it as a national collection. I think it was Archbishop Roach, who was the chairman of the USCCB or NCCB at the time. So he approached Roach, said, "We had this really effective campaign in Chicago. I think it would make a great national collection." They made it a national collection. The first take, I think, was somewhere around $10 million.
That's a lot of money in 1969 or 70s or whatever.
Yeah, it was 72, I think, is when they officially launched it as a collection. But then, this was not something that was unopposed. There was a lot of scrutiny of CCHD grants all the way back in this, at least in terms of what I could find, back in the very early 80s. I saw reports where they were scrutinizing groups that were getting money from the CCHD, and I'll tell you what, it's fascinating when you look at the responses from the CCHD, because they are exactly the same as the responses we see today. Hasn't changed a bit.
Which is, they're so nice, they're using the money for a good reason, good purpose.
Or they'll look at a bunch of groups and see all the opposition to the funding that they're giving and saying, well, we're not giving to that specific project, we're only giving to this, and so the money is okay, and that's fine. And but they'll find one out of a group and they'll say, well, this group stepped over a line, so we're going to defund them, like tossing them a bone, and then everything's okay, right? Except it isn't. So in the 80s, there was a lot of scrutiny of the CCHD until I think it was 94 or 95 when Paul Locutus of The Wanderer wrote an article about the Campaign for Human Development. It was more like a booklet. He wrote a series of articles for The Wanderer, and I think it later became a booklet. And in this booklet, it was CHD. It was all about the problems with the CHD, and it caused all kinds of issues for them, and their collections tanked. So then, in the late 90s or early 2000s, somewhere around in there, the USCCB got together and said, you know what, we need to do a better job of marketing this, and so they changed it to the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. And, well, that's where we are today.
So that's when it became the CCHD.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
And the tradition of funding questionable programs continues right into our own day.
Without a doubt. So I don't know where you are. You're in Texas, I believe.
Yep.
Okay. So you know who Wendy Davis is.
Oh, yes.
I'm sure you do.
She's the Democrat hardcore pro-abortion advocate.
Yep.
Yeah. Hardcore.
Here in Virginia, we referred to her as Abortion Barbie.
Yes.
Your listeners may recall that she stood on, the House of Representatives floor with a catheter so that she could filibuster a pro-life legislation.
Yeah.
In 2007, she had announced her bid to run for public office. Prior to that, she was part of the the city council for Dallas-Fort Worth. And
Fort Worth, yeah. I'm from Fort Worth, yeah.
Are you?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So she was from Fort Worth, yeah.
She was part of the city council there. Ralph McLeod, the current director of the CCHD, was the mayor pro tem of Fort Worth. And so he worked very closely with Wendy Davis. When she announced her bid to run for state legislature, he gave her a huge ringing endorsement and said, oh, she's going to be great for the state of Texas, and I think she's going to represent our community well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then he agreed to be on her campaign staff. He was her official campaign treasurer.
Yes. And
then he went to D.C. right afterward to become the head of the Campaign for Human Development.
It's scandalous.
Absolutely scandalous.
This is the most, for people who don't know Texas politics, this is the most radical abortion campaign we have ever had. I mean, it was all in the news. She raised an army and made a big stink in Texas over abortion. So the fact that her campaign manager runs the CCHD is diabolical, horrific. Treasurer.
Yeah.
It reveals behind the veil what's going on at the CCHD.
Well, do you know what Ralph McLeod's response to the report that came out about that was? He said, oh, in the 4 years that I worked with her, it never came up.
Yeah,
I had no idea she was pro-abortion. Okay.
It's impossible.
Let's grant that that's true. That means you're A, a buffoon,
right,
and B, completely incompetent for being able to examine CCHD grantees and determining which ones are pro-abortion or not.
Yeah, if he didn't know Wendy Davis was pro-abortion, he didn't know anybody was pro-abortion.
Exactly.
Yeah. They hired the perfect guy.
Oh, you bet.
Yeah.
You bet. McLeod, of course, he's... The fact that this guy is the director of the CCHD should be ringing all kinds of alarm bells because in 2008, right after Obama got elected, a group called the Gamaliel Foundation held this huge national conference. I think the conference was, it was called Realizing the Promise. And it was this big celebration that one of ours got elected. Now, you'd mentioned Obama before. He not only was a community organizer, he was the director of a Gamaliel group in Chicago. We have a scanned copy of checks and billing receipts signed off from the Archdiocese of Chicago to Barack Obama to send him out for training, for community organizing training.
You have those pictures.
We have those pictures.
That's amazing.
Yep. So when Gamaliel Foundation runs this huge conference saying we are going to be celebrating the fact that one of ours got elected, the Realizing the Promise, because Obama said he was going to give all sorts of rights and powers to community organizing groups. So that was the promise they were realizing. Ralph McLeod, as executive director of the CCHD, represented the CCHD at this conference. So they're celebrating the election of Barack Obama. McLeod gets up there and he starts giving this huge speech where he says, it's a good day. It's not just a good day. It's a great day. Why is it a great day? Because Obama was elected.
Yeah.
So he goes off and on and on and on about this. And then he says that because Obama was elected, soon we're going to see justice running through the streets like water, and we're going to see the lion laying down with the lamb, and we will see a shining new Jerusalem descend upon society. So he turned Obama into the Messiah.
Yeah.
He did. This is the director of the CCHD.
Right.
Now, I proved to Ralph McLeod in a series of letters that the Gamaliel Foundation lied directly to him about its relationship with an organization called the Fair Immigration Movement. This movement was pushing same-sex marriage. So I found that the Gamaliel Foundation was not just a member of this group, but it was also on the steering committee of this group, which means it was dictating policy. And I said, look, Ralph, your new guidelines say that CCHD grantees aren't allowed to be part of coalitions that are promoting anything that's against church teaching. And so the response that we got back was, oh, that was back in 2010. And we have a letter that they sent us that they said, or that they provided to the Fair Immigration Reform Movement, saying they couldn't be a part of their group anymore because they had promoted same-sex marriage. And I said, really? Because then I sent him screen captures from meeting minutes from a year and a half later showing that Ana Garcia Ashley, who was the executive director of the Gamaliel Foundation, was nominated to be on the steering committee of the Fair Immigration Reform Movement, that they were still a partner, they were still active with this group, and I got this all on the Gamaliel Foundation's website. I sent all of that information to Ralph McLeod, and the next letter that I got was a cancellation of our meeting saying we see no reason to meet at this time.
Wow. So this is basically your Barack Obama, abortion Barbie political movement receiving money from the plate at the local Catholic Mass.
That's right. That's right.
It is so scandalous.
Oh, it's worse than scandalous. I mean, you said it earlier. It's diabolical.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this is what Our Lady or what Sister Lucia was referring to when she mentioned diabolical disorientation.
Yes.
A lot of people have no idea what's going on. They simply listen to what the priest tells them from the pulpit. They listen to what their bishop says. And I'm not saying they shouldn't. I think that we should be listening to our priests and bishops. But the fact of the matter is, like Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. And if you get an inkling that maybe something's not right in Allentown, you should take a look and figure out what might be wrong. And the fact of the matter is, we've found over and over and over that CCHD grantees are actively pushing abortion, contraception, homosexuality, and Marxism.
Yeah. Now, you said there were originally, going back into the 70s when all this began, that there was criticisms of the funding. Were those organized groups or just individuals or priests? Who was pointing out that there were discrepancies between who was getting money and upholding the Catholic faith?
So there was, I believe, the Media Research Council, which I think formed back in the 1980s. They had originally done a lot of research into Industrial Areas Foundation and Saul Alinsky groups. Stephanie Block, who ran a newsletter out of Arizona for many years, she was really kind of the pioneer in researching CCHD grantees, and she was constantly exposing what these people were up to. And The Wanderer, was the other one. They were probably the biggest publication that was exposing CCHD, and that's actually why The Wanderer was persona non grata with many bishops and dioceses throughout the country.
Yeah. Now, what's in it for the local bishop to promote the CCHD? I know of several cases, and I know of several bishops where prominent lay people or groups of lay people protest the CCHD, and the bishop goes forward with it. In fact, I think all bishops in the U.S. participate in the CCHD?
No, in fact, there are some bishops that have pulled out of the CCHD.
Do you know who they are? Can we share who they are?
I don't know who they are anymore, but I do know that Bishop Morlino of happy memory, he was one of the ones that not only pulled out of the CCHD, but swore he'd never return to it.
Right.
Bishop Slattery out in Tulsa, Oklahoma, he didn't participate in the CCHD campaign, but he's now retired.
Yes.
I know that Cardinal Burke did not participate. Bishop Ricken in Green Bay, Wisconsin, halted his collection for a time. Bishop Sheridan in Colorado Springs, halted his collection for a time. I don't know if he still is. So there are a number of bishops. I think I counted almost 20 when I first started reporting on CCHD grantees, 20 bishops that had decided that they were either going to pause or withdraw completely from the CCHD.
Good. So there's nothing compelling. I want everyone to hear this. There's nothing compelling your local ordinary bishop to participate in this. He can't say, well, my hands are tied, or I have to do it, or USCCB says I have to.
Right.
He can say, no, we're not going to collect that money, and we're not going to send it on to D.C.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's absolutely correct.
He could collect the money and do something locally with it.
Well, yeah, and that's exactly what Bishop Slattery did. He collected the money, and he gave the money to crisis pregnancy centers and to pro-life campaigns throughout the state. Unfortunately, his successor has reversed all of that.
Yeah.
But you know, there's a lot of good that can be done with money if you are good and pure of heart. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of these bishops are just totally in bed with the social justice idea and the far leftist socialist agenda.
So, I mean, is it fair to say that if a bishop is with all the info out there and all the info that's been put out by you, Lepanto, does that mean if a bishop is collecting the CCHD, he's in bed with this agenda? He's okay with it? I mean, it seems now lay people know about it. Of course, bishops, it doesn't take that much time to do a Google search and figure out what the CCHD is up to.
Right.
So if the bishop's passing the plate for this, I mean, that makes him complicit.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. You know, these bishops are either complicit or they're brain dead because the information that is out there is so direct. Now, CCHD comes out and they'll say things like, oh, we looked into that. That's all old information. Or they'll come up with some smooth way of explaining away why it's okay to give this group money. But the answers never address the very specific facts. For instance, I'll give you one. This group that we busted was about 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago. This group is called, where is it? The New Mexico Acequia Association. Now, it sounds innocuous. They
all sound innocuous, don't they?
I know.
They're the lamest names, you know, and they have these goofy acronyms associated with them.
Right.
Yeah.
So the New Mexico Acequia Association, being in Texas, you know what acequias are. An acequia is a waterway. They're old waterways that provide water to local communities and that kind of thing. So this association ostensibly is all about trying to make sure that the acequias are well maintained and that the indigenous peoples who are fed by these waterways have particular rights in order to maintain the water and everything else. Okay, it's kind of a good idea. The problem is that the executive director for the New Mexico Acequia Association is a woman named Paula Garcia. Now, Paula Garcia has a very long history in state politics. She was the chairman of the, the chairman of the Democratic Party in Mora County. She served 2 terms with that. She served a couple of terms in local city politics, and then she ran for state government. She ran for House District 40 in the state of New Mexico. All that time, she was involved in politics. She was also the executive director of the New Mexico Acequia Association. So she was using the finances that she was receiving from her employment with this community organizing group to launch her political career.
Right.
And what we found is that while this organization was receiving campaign funds, she was getting endorsements from Planned Parenthood to run her campaign. And I'm just going to quote you what Planned Parenthood says here. It says, as you know, Planned Parenthood Votes New Mexico takes very seriously the vigor with which candidates pledge to support access to reproductive health care, including abortion. We only endorse candidates who we know will be champions for Planned Parenthood. And there is her name right there on their list. So Planned Parenthood was very, very thorough in vetting their candidate. Clearly not as thorough as the CCHD is in vetting grantees. Unless, of course, the CCHD is in bed with them, which I think they are.
Right. And this is within the past month.
This is within the past
month. Yeah, so this isn't like your bishop says to you, oh, yeah, there were problems with the CCHD 4 or 5 years ago. It's been cleaned up, under control. No, it's still a problem.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So how much money are we talking about here? I mean, I'm assuming there's got to be some of this money from the CCHDs going to some good purposes. How much do you estimate is, over time, round numbers going to these compromised organizations in the form of grants?
So the average grant, total grants coming out of the CCHD.
Yeah, how much is it total every year?
It's anywhere from $9 to about $15 million. Yep.
That's a lot of money.
Yes, it is. And that's a lot of money. Now, just to put that into perspective.
I bet the FSSP seminary like a little bit of that.
I'll bet.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to put this into perspective. The annual budget, the total budget for the pro-life office of the USCCB is about $2 million.
Whoa.
Now, CCHD gets a national collection. The pro-life office of the USCCB does not.
That right there is a problem.
Yes, it is. It's a huge problem.
It means the USCCB privileges these community organizers more than they do pro-life. That's ridiculous. Right. That's ridiculous.
Oh, it's worse than that, because one of the stipulations is that they will not give CCHD grants to exclusively Catholic organizations. So we're not even talking about a propagation of the faith. They'll give to interfaith groups. They'll give to.
So if I were helping Waterways in New Mexico, but we were officially a Catholic group, we would not get a grant.
That's correct.
That's ridiculous.
That's correct. So the Catholic Church is giving money to organizations specifically outside the Catholic Church. We're collecting money from Catholics to give to non-Catholics.
Why? This is from the pews, from the plate.
That's right. That's right. But that's exactly what this group is doing. I ran some numbers when I was first doing all this investigation back in 2010, 2011, 2012. And what I found was that in 2010, there were a total of 237 grantees of the CCHD. 21% of those were in direct violation of CCHD guidelines. In 2011, the number of grantees went down to about 214, but 24% of those were in violation.
Wow. So 21 to 24.
Then the number dropped down to 192 total grantees. And of those, 38% were in violation of CCHD grant guidelines.
So 21%, 24%, 38%. Increasing, not decreasing.
Right, right. Now, some of that may have been because the proportion of total grants was going down, which was probably because people stopped giving after the research that I was publishing. So we are working currently on a very thorough report on the 2017-2018 grants list. And when it's done, we'll do another complete analysis the same way we did in the early days, 2010 to 2012. And I think that we're going to find a pretty staggering number of grantees that are in total violation of CCHD guidelines. Yeah.
This doesn't make any sense. I mean, it would be like we lay people saying the Catholic Church is exclusively Catholic, so I'm not tithing or giving any of my money to you anymore. I'm only giving it to ecumenical organizations as a Catholic. That doesn't make any sense.
No. I remember talking to a bishop once. We were talking about Catholic Relief Services, and I said, because we were talking about how CRS was giving money to organizations that were acting against church teaching and non-Catholics. And I said, I remember when I was a kid, and my mom, I saw the little guy with the bell on the red basket there, and I was like, oh, he's collecting money for the poor, and I wanted to tithe. I wanted to help the poor. And I said, can I go put some money in the little collection bell thing? And she said, no. And I said, well, why not? She said, because the money is going to a group called the Salvation Army, which is a Protestant organization, and a part of their mission is to go out and proselytize people into their Protestant church.
That's right.
So you would be giving money to an organization that is drawing people away from the Catholic Church. And I went, oh.
She was the proto-founder of the Lepanto Institute at that moment.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I owe a lot to my parents and grandparents for this.
Yeah. So when is the collection for the CCHD? When do we look out for this?
Primarily, the national collection takes place in the third week in November.
Right. This past year, it was right after the botched, scandalous USCCB meeting. As soon as they got out of that, they said, "Hey, give us some money for CCHD," and everybody said, "No, thank you." Did you look at their Twitter feed on that, Michael?
No, I didn't.
I followed it because I found it interesting that it was everyone was going after the USCCB because they voted down investigating McCarrick, right? And it was a big problem. But then they started asking money for CCHD, and it was 9-1 negative comments. I mean, you guys have been doing good work because the word's getting out. They're like, I would never give money to CCHD, and people saying it goes to abortion, it goes to bad groups, just and they were just getting fried on Twitter.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. So, I mean, the word is getting out. Hopefully people also watch this video and go check out Lepanto Institute and see the hard facts that this is not a Catholic cause. Do not put money in these envelopes.
Now, there are some dioceses that collect in the spring. So you'll see a special collection, and it won't necessarily say Campaign for Human Development. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they say they're just collecting for the poor or for, so you have to be very careful about what you're giving to. Some dioceses even rope it into their annual appeal. So there are some dioceses that tie in the CCHD collection with their annual appeal or with a special collection. They'll say, well, we're doing a collection for, I don't know, a joint effort on something.
Right.
So it won't necessarily say CCHD, but some of the money could probably be going to the CCHD because of that.
Right. Have you done any research on Catholic Charities and any of their work with suspicious activity?
Yeah, in fact, when I was at American Life League, I did a full video report on Catholic Charities president, who at the time was a Father Larry Snyder. Father Snyder was on the committee of something called the America's Promise Alliance. And while he was a part of that, they were giving awards to all these little community groups that were, doing, I don't know, fluffy, puppy rainbows things. But these awards were going to organizations specifically because they were promoting homosexuality or contraception. And so I pointed out, I said, look, Catholic Charities, the president of Catholic Charities is on the board of a group that is promoting contraception and homosexuality. This is something that should not be taking place. I also got Catholic Charities to withdraw from a group called, what was it? I can almost remember it, HCRM. I can't remember the name of the organization. But anyway, the problem was this coalition that they were a member of, the USCCB was a member also, but this coalition was out there, it was lobbying against pro-life justices because they were pro-life. And
What?
Right. So yeah, Catholic Charities USA is no good. I also looked into the Catholic Health Association, and I did some reports on them a couple of years ago too. But I've been finding it's the social justice movement almost entirely through and through.
Yep.
You look into social justice and you scratch the surface, and you're going to find either socialism or homosexuality or abortion.
Yep. Because if you go back and look at Thomas Aquinas, there's only justice. Justice is the virtue of what is due to another. There's what's due to God, which is our worship, which is why we are obligated on pain of mortal sin to go to Mass on Sundays and holy days of obligation, because it is a matter of justice. We owe it to God. And when there's justice, what we owe to one another as persons. That means justice is always social. It's always between persons. There's the three persons of the Trinity, and there's all the persons on earth, and we have what we owe to one another, what we owe to God. So when you say social justice, you're already trumping up the term.
Right. Well,
if I said justice and you said, do you mean the social justice or the non-social justice? That doesn't make any. There is no such thing as non-social justice. You don't owe something to nothing or to no one.
Right.
So whenever you hear social justice, be ready, because there's a little bit of socialism mixed into that justice.
Right. Fulton Sheen actually addressed this in one of his many, many talks, where he talked about this current movement for social justice. And he said, the people who are pushing this movement for social justice act as if they will be socially saved. He said, you're not going to be saved because you're marching under the same banner. You will all be individually judged. And then he went on to say, people talk about social justice, but what about God's justice? And the general response is that God's justice is not being paid attention to where social justice is.
That's right. Which is part of our justice towards the justice we owe towards God is worshiping Him, attending Mass, public service, giving, support of the church, but also obedience to the moral law.
Sure.
Which means thou shalt not kill, it means no abortion, it means no contraception, it means traditional marriage between a man and a woman, open to procreation, all of these things. Right. So if your social justice program doesn't contain those elements on its platform or is against it, as you've been explaining, there's no justice at all in that.
Exactly.
It's a sham.
Well, have you ever noticed that the social justice crowd, they all talk about the poor, they talk about immigration, they talk, the climate. It's all this horizontal plane nonsense.
Yeah. Justice to the earth.
Yeah, justice for the earth. But what's interesting is a lot of this goes back to the stupid sing-songy garbage that we get in the glory and praise hymnals.
Yep.
And if you hear that song, blessed are they who hunger and thirst, da 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 da, they never finish the phrase. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst. Theirs is the kingdom of God.
For righteousness.
For righteousness. That's right. They leave that off.
Yeah.
It's almost as if you're blessed just because you're hungry and thirsty. Well, I'm blessed every day then.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a huge problem. So I want to go back to Catholic Charities because I think people know about that. I think the CCHD and the work you've done with Lepanto Institute has trickled through and people are aware. Oh, CCHD, isn't that group that gives money to bad organizations? I think most people that are in the know who are Sunday attending Catholics are starting to realize that. But Catholic Charities, I think people still think, well, that's the good one.
Right. They think Catholic Charities is the good one. They think Catholic Relief Services is the good one.
Right.
And I'll tell you, I've been researching Catholic Relief Services for as long as I've been researching CCHD, and it's at least as bad, if not worse.
Okay.
And that's a whole other program, but we can talk at length about the problems I've been finding there. I've got report after report on my website showing how Catholic Relief Services was directly involved in the promotion of contraception and condoms in Kenya, in the Congo, in Rwanda, and any number of their other documents.
Yeah, this is hard for pious, Christ-loving Catholics to comprehend that our cardinals and our bishops and our priests, all on paper, you buy a copy of the catechism and it has very strong language against abortion and contraception and it affirms traditional marriage and all this. So on paper, we know all this. And so it's scandalous. It's hard for people to wrap their minds around the fact that we have clergy and hierarchy who are subtly promoting these evils with church money. Yep.
And I don't like to bag on the bishops too much because I think a lot of them are just plain naive.
You think so? Do you think so? In a post-McCarrick era, where everybody wants to say, I didn't know McCarrick did all this bad stuff and had a beach house and was having these relations with all these young men. Did you know that? I never knew that. And now they're also telling, what, you mean we've been giving them millions of dollars to pro-contraception, pro-abortion, pro-homosexual groups? I didn't know that. Come on.
I'll give you an example. I did meet with a bishop once who I've developed a very good relationship with afterward. And I showed him everything that I was finding on the CCHD. This was about 2010. And I was in his office, and I was just turning page after page, and his jaw got lower and lower to the ground as I was showing him more and more about what was going on. And he looks at me and he goes, "Michael, this is awful. What should we do?" And I was like, "I'm coming to you."
Yeah, like, I don't wear a mitre to Mass.
Yeah, exactly. But, he had no idea, and he didn't know what to do about it. I told him all about Ralph McLeod, and he said, this is horrible. He said, right. I don't even know how to get someone fired at the USCCB. This is a bishop.
Yeah.
He's a member of the USCCB, and he doesn't have the authority or the power to remove somebody who works there. That says an awful lot. Yeah. An awful lot.
Yeah. In the post-McCarrick era, people are starting to ask, what is the USCCB? Who is in charge of it? Who fires people? Who hires people? What is this thing? It's new. I mean, it didn't exist before Vatican II. It
did.
I guess there was the National Conference. Is that what it was called?
So prior to that, it was actually the National Catholic War Council, and it was created after World War II in order to collect some funds and some resources in order to send to war-torn Europe. Because, we wanted to help people in Europe who were, suffering. And so that was the idea ostensibly. But it turned into a political lobbying group because they realized as they are conducting these things overseas, not only was there a lot of money coming in, but they were meeting a lot of politicians. And they were finding that politicians wanted to attach their name to something like this because it was giving them a good image when they would go out and campaign. So there was a little bit of quid pro quo. In the 60s, this turned into government funding when USAID opened its doors. Now, we have to remember, USAID was funded or created specifically as a population control program. If you look in the founding documents of USAID, it says right there, point letter C, that its priority is population control.
What does USAID stand for, Michael?
United States Aid. Oh boy, you would ask.
Anyway, USAID. Yeah.
Yep. So it's basically the aid and development agency of the United States, where they collect money and they send it overseas to set up these programs. But it was 66. When it was created, and the Catholic Church said, hey, we'd like some of that money too. And so USAID started funding CRS. CRS, which was intrinsically linked with the USCCB at the time, had to split off into its own separate agency.
I see.
So Catholic Relief Services was born out of the National Catholic War Council. National Catholic War Council it sounded hawkish, so they wanted to change the name. That name got changed to the National Conference of Catholic Bishops. So there you had two entities, but Catholic Relief Services was the official project of the NCCB. And it was receiving government money. It was giving prestige to these bishops. These bishops felt good about doing some good work. But from the very beginning, they were in bed with a population control program.
Right. Wow. So where can people learn more? I mean, Lepanto Institute, you referred to reports. How do we access these reports? How do we get this information? How do we disseminate it? How do we do some community organizing to get this information out there?
Right. So if you go to our website, which is lepantoinstitute.org, that's Lepanto.
Lepanto, like the Battle of Lepanto. Battle of Lepanto.
Correct.
Yeah.
Just like the ship you see behind me, that's that's a model of the Real.
Very nice. So lepantoinstitute.org.
Yep. And you click on our charity reports. From there, you will see reports on Catholic Relief Services, reports on the Catholic Medical Mission Board. We are currently working on putting in a link for all our research on the CCHD. That'll be forthcoming, but we'll put that together as well. And we've got a ton of other reports. Read our blog. Most of our material is available through our blog. So that's it.
Good. Is there any connection with McCarrick? I know he was so prominent, during this time period in D.C. He was best buddies with Bernadine. Does he have any connection with the CCHD?
So Cardinal McCarrick I don't know that he had any connection with CCHD, but he was on the board of Catholic Relief Services for 18 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and in fact, it was the longest amount of time that anybody has ever served on the board of Catholic Relief Services. They made a special change in the rules because typically you only serve 3 years on Catholic Relief Services board. And then you serve at most 2 terms. So we're talking a max of 6 years. But McCarrick was on for 18 years. McCarrick was also the chairman of Catholic Relief Services Foundations Board. And he was the chairman of that, I think, for 13 years. So his connection to Catholic
What's that? What's the foundation?
So the Foundations Board of Catholic Relief Services was the board that was ostensibly going out and collecting tons of money from super wealthy Catholics to go into Catholic Relief Services coffers. And so they created this Foundations Board saying all of you are a part of the foundation of Catholic Relief Services. And it was a way of making people feel like they were participating in the work of Catholic Relief Services by giving oodles and oodles of money. So McCarrick served on that as well. So his connection with CRS is much stronger than his connection with the CCHD.
Wow. And if you guys are studying that in depth, sounds like that's important, I think, in a post-McCarrick era.
You bet.
This has to be exposed.
Absolutely.
It seems to me, Michael, that, when the church needs money, there's always a temptation to create some gimmick. We think back to the time of Martin Luther and, every time the coffer clings, another soul from purgatory springs, and Tetzel and that whole thing. And Luther rebelled against that, threw the baby out the bathwater. But it seems in our own time that wouldn't work. You couldn't go to people and say, hey, if you want your relatives out of purgatory or yourself, give us a little money. Instead, it's sort of this 1960s Peter, Paul, and Mary hippie idea. We need to help everybody. The social justice idea. Give peace a chance. John Lennon's Imagine is what it is.
Oh, yeah.
The music's that way. It looks like it. That's the age group. This is where the money's coming from. And so that's the gimmick, to milk people of millions and millions of dollars. And McCarrick was right there in it.
You saw Pope Francis's meeting at the United Nations, right? Did you watch that?
No, I didn't watch
charade?
it.
So this took place in 2015. This was when Pope Francis was making his first trip to the United States. And
yes, I did. I did see this. Yeah.
So right before Pope Francis comes out there, what do they sing? John Lennon's Imagine.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yep.
Imagine there's no heaven.
Yep.
Imagine no hell below us.
Yeah.
It's an atheistic communist hymn.
Yep. That's exactly what it is, and that's what the social justice movement is all about.
Yeah.
They're pushing their socialist, atheist, materialist idealism. That's all it is.
Yeah. If they had played John Lennon's Imagine before Pope Pius X came out, Pope Pius X would have ripped down the curtains and thrown it over the table.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, he wouldn't have had any of that, But yeah, it's this awesome. Hippie communist, it's the boomer generation of give peace a chance, and that's the gimmick by which they are raking in the dough, and then giving it to their non-Catholic friends.
And it's all supported with the Catholic social justice-y music that we listen to, or not me. I don't go to a church that does that, but it's all right there in the music. So it's transforming the culture through the music, through the liturgy, through our social action. I mean, they've changed the idea of charity and turned it into an industry.
Yes,
it's
a gimmick.
It's no longer it's not just gimmick. It's not even charity. Right. Because when you think about what happens when you give money, it is always soul to soul. And I will always remember, I used to go haunt the USCCB meeting every fall. and just make everybody feel nervous by
Isn't there a plenary indulgence attached to that?
Probably.
I'm just kidding. Yeah. Yeah.
But I remember I was down in the lobby and I wanted to go to mass, so I walked all the way to St. Alphonsus. It was about a mile and a half or so. So I walked all the way there. And on my way, there was this lady standing outside a Subway, and she asked me if she could have some money for dinner for her and her husband. And I said, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll go ahead and buy you some dinner. And it was pretty clear that she was drunk. She reeked of alcohol. Her husband seemed like someone who had blown his mind out on some sort of drugs, and he was mute. And she was kind of talkative and antsy as she was talking. So it was clear that she was on something too. But I figured anybody can eat a meal. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'll buy you dinner. So I bought her and her husband a sandwich. I bought them drinks, and then I sat down with them and I said, I have bought you, or I have purchased your time. So while you're eating, you get to listen to me. And I said, you need to clean yourself up, and the two of you have got to leave behind whatever it is that you're involved in. I said, I want you to go. I said, in payment to me, I want you to go to this church right down the road, and I want you to spend an hour just sitting there and looking into the golden tabernacle in the front.
Love it.
And
Love
I said,
this is charity.
I sat and I talked to her like this for a good half an hour. And as I'm talking, there were tears streaming down her face. And I said, I'm not going to ask for any other repayment. I just want you to pray for me, pray for my family, and pray for yourself, because you are worth a lot more than what you are doing to yourself.
Amen to that.
And that's charity. That's charity. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Yeah. What the USCCB is doing, taking money and giving it to organizations that are promoting the social justice garbage, is not charity, and it is actually counterintuitive to what the church's mission is.
Amen. I mean, why should a grandmother in Tulsa be funding the pro-abortion campaign of a woman in New Mexico? Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Not at all.
Yeah. Not at all. It doesn't make sense for the Catholic Church to be involved with any of this. No. And there we are.
There we are. I want to go back to something, Michael, that you said about the liturgies and the music. This isn't just an annual collection. It is a culture. It is a version, an inverted, perverted, false version of Catholicism. And it's embedded, as you observed, in hymns, in liturgies. Yeah. And I think as dads, how many children do you have, Michael?
6.
6. Amen. Praise God. As fathers of many children, we want our children to be raised and to have the true, pristine, non-poisoned, unadulterated Catholic faith. And I think it's not enough just to say, like what your mother said, which was noble, don't give to the Salvation Army. That's a Protestant group. But they also have to be cultivated in the proper music, the proper liturgy, the proper sermons. We can't let our kids hear these social justice, Peter, Paul, and Mary, lame-o sermons.
You're right.
We are in a battle. Our kids are growing up in a post-Christian, anti-Christian society, and they need the meat. They need it straight. And so this is just another, I know you, I've spoken to you, I know that you feel the same way. We have to protect our kids and our wives and our families, our friends, to make sure that we're being formed correctly. Because it's not just about an annual donation. This is about a culture.
Yep. It's about culture, and I can only answer that by giving an example from what we do in our family. I don't shy away from what I do when I'm with my family. My kids are aware of the work that I do. They may not know the specifics. They certainly don't know the disgusting details of what we found with McCarrick and things like that. But I remember for crying out loud, when my oldest son was 5 years old, we participated in the 40 Days for Life campaign, the very first one. And we were at the Planned Parenthood, and we were praying the rosary, and my son interrupted me, and he said, Dad, is that where they kill babies? And he pointed right up at the Planned Parenthood office. And I said, yeah. So we went back to our rosary, and then later on, he stops me again, and he says, Dad, I think on Easter Sunday, Jesus is going to come down from his cross and stop them. And, this is a 5-year-old.
Yeah. He's thinking it through.
He's thinking it through. Later on, when he was about 11, I could not shield them from the dramatic homosexual nonsense that was going through, especially as same-sex marriage was being pushed.
Right.
So as that fight was starting to develop, my son, when he was 11 years old, he overheard me talking to my wife about some of this stuff, and he said he didn't really understand the terms we were using, and I said, look, there are some men who think that they can marry other men. And he goes, what?
Yeah,
that doesn't make sense. And I said, no, it doesn't make sense, and it's not a good thing. No. And he said, no, why would anybody do that? And I said, because culture seems to think that it's a good thing. So he was thinking about that. My daughters understand the problems with things like that, of that nature in the culture. Like I said, you don't have to be graphic, but you have to be sure that you make them aware of what is happening, because if you keep them in the dark, by the time they get out into the culture, they're going to be absolutely shocked and they won't know how to think or feel about it.
Yeah. I've had the same conversations with my kids.
Yeah.
Yep. And they are exposed younger and younger. It's in TV. It's in PG movies, folks. Yep. It's on television shows. It's in songs, popular songs on the radio. It's coming at them. So if you're not teaching them the other way, there's an avalanche. There's a tidal wave of all this filth coming at our kids. So we have to really, really make sure that they're taught well, and we teach them right about giving, like your parents taught you. But also they have to be formed in the proper liturgical and hymns and culture and catechesis and preaching and all of these things, because we're in a war.
Well, no, go ahead.
I was going to ask you what, if you have a follow-up comment, please do it. But my next question was going to be, what do we do as Catholics to help the poor?
Well, helping the poor, I think that direct action is always the best, because it gives us an opportunity to proselytize. Pope Francis says, you shouldn't be proselytizing. Absolutely you should. That was the Great Commission. That's what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
They give it a negative connotation, saying, proselytizing is like punching someone in the face and saying, you have to be Catholic.
Right.
No, it isn't.
Right.
First of all, you're not gonna make anybody Catholic by doing that.
Yeah.
I think
it's not an effective strategy.
King Clovis was the last one to try and convert people by sword point.
Right.
That's not what we do as Catholics. Proselytizing means telling people about the good news and helping them to make sure that they understand that they have dignity and worth in the eyes of Jesus Christ. Why do we have such a huge problem with gender identity right now? It's because people have lost this sense of their relationship with God. Right. There's a complete and total disconnect. They don't think that they have any worth because they don't have any connection with the one who created them. We're made in the image and likeness of God. So this idea that we have no worth is a complete and total illusion of the devil. And the reason he does it is because he was not made in the image and likeness of God.
That's right.
So he is envious of us. He wants us to think that we have no self-worth. But when we go out and we engage with the poor, whether it's in a soup kitchen or, there are all sorts of ways to help.
Yeah.
I mean, there are volunteer programs all over the place. I think that it's important and necessary for Catholics to actually use their hands to meet the poor face to face and to engage with them, to help them. If you see somebody on the street, there are street beggars everywhere. If there's a guy sitting there on the street with a sign that says, out of work, need help, God bless, they all say the same. It's not good enough just to sit there and drop $5 in his little cup, because chances are he's going to use it to buy booze. Offer to, take him to Burger King, give him a burger, give him some food, but use the opportunity to also help him to understand and realize his self-worth as the Imago Dei, as the image of God. That's what we're supposed to do.
And in need of redemption. and healing.
Yes.
Which we
Yes.
as Catholics believe that through the redemption of Jesus Christ, through baptism, through the sacraments, we can be transformed into something ugly to gold, to something beautiful.
Well,
beauty for ashes.
That's the biggest robbery of the social justice movement. They have perverted the charitable works of the church so much that they've contented themselves to feed bellies while they're starving souls.
Yeah. Did you see Athanasius Schneider kind of was flipping some of these things around, where he was talking about we need to talk about climate change in the church, where we have a sense of sin, and he was talking about we have an immigration problem. We need to have souls immigrating towards a state of grace, being inside of a state of grace. So he's using a lot of the language that Pope Francis and other liberal clergy use, but he's re-spiritualizing it. And I think that's the same thing here. When it comes to poverty, of course, we as Catholics, we have an obligation to assist and help the poor. But also we recognize the greatest poverty is the lack of grace in the soul.
Yep.
The lack of the divine life of the Holy Trinity in the soul. I mean, Christ did feed the hungry by multiplying the bread. But the greatest gift, the thing that we celebrate, the crucifix that we wear around our neck, it's not a picture of Jesus holding loaves of bread,
right,
feeding lots of people. It's him on the cross. That is the act that achieves for us, that buys us back and gives us sanctifying grace in our souls so that we can know, love, and serve God.
So the addendum to the story about the multiplication of the loaves, which was not a bunch of people carrying bread and sharing.
Miracle of sharing.
But the multiplication of the loaves, he was moved to pity because of their hunger, and he fed them. And while they were eating, he preached.
That's right.
And that was the real message right there, was that it was both and. Yes, you can't talk to somebody while they're starving. You can't. Yeah. I think it was St. John's Gospel where he says it's not good enough to see somebody who's starving and in poverty and say, "God be with you and have a good day," and walk on. It's not good enough.
Yeah.
So he fed them, then he preached to them, and then he brought them with him. And the next day, what happened? He went away. Why did he go away? He went away because the people looked for him because they wanted a bread king. They wanted somebody who was going to feed them and keep them fed and not let them suffer. But his message was that suffering is a good thing. It was in the Beatitudes. So he went away because they completely missed the point. They missed everything that he was saying, and that's why he left. They just wanted the food.
Yeah, the bread king. I like it. I mean, the Caesars figured it out. Bread and circuses. They figured it out. How do we keep people from revolting and keep them supportive of us? Throw them some loaves, put on a show in the Colosseum. They'll support us, and that's what we have today. We have politicians, but sadly, we have cardinals, a pope, who also seem to want to promote Christ as the bread king, and they want to use the government.
Yeah.
And tax money. Yep. And collections to do it, to facilitate it.
And what they're doing, they're giving communion to pro-abortion politicians. Right. And by doing so, they are saying, we have no king but Caesar.
That's right.
That's exactly what they're saying.
Right.
I did a podcast a couple of years ago under the title, The 6 Last Words of Judas. And I went through and I looked for every single time Judas spoke in Scripture. And I analyzed his words in relation to what was happening. And when you study what Judas was saying, and it's interesting, Judas only spoke 6 times, but Jesus had 7 last words. So Judas representing the number of man, 6. And Jesus representing the number of completion, the perfect number, 7. And then what you have is an anti-gospel, because everything Judas was talking about was all about social justice.
It was.
And it was all about, I mean, the whole thing. So, and why was he into social justice? It was because he was guilty or he was greedy. He was the one who was pilfering money from the coffers.
Yep.
He was also the one who handed Christ over to be crucified. And what happens every single time a bishop hands our Lord over to a pro-abortion politician in the Eucharist? He is repeating the creed of Judas.
Yes.
It is all the Church of Judas. This whole
it.
social justice is the Church of Judas.
Yeah, you remember when the woman used the expensive oil on our Lord, anointing him for burial. Judas says, hey, that could have been sold and given to the poor.
Yep.
It was Judas who said that.
Yep.
Social gospel.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
That's all that it is. And when did he lose his faith? When our Lord proclaimed the Eucharist.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, so this is so much deeper. I mean, as we began, this is diabolical, it's satanic, Luciferian, and we have clergy who have become confused in doctrine, which leads to confusion, as Paul says in Romans 1, to confuse sexuality, which explains our crisis, and then also is a confused gospel, which leads to the veneration of Christ as bread king. I like that term, bread king, Michael.
Yeah.
Yeah. And pretty much wraps it up, doesn't it?
There we go. But it all comes back to the Eucharist. You know, we can even say that we started this talking about the Eucharist in an oblique way, because what we had with the beginning of the social justice movement was a shunning of Christ, which I think in retrospect is one of the reasons why we see the altar, the tabernacle moved away from the altar table, is because as the social justice movement was taking form, the church was turning her back on Christ.
That's right.
And that's what we have in this social justice movement with the Campaign for Human Development, with Catholic Relief Services, and all the other organizations out there.
Yep. And I guarantee you that if you're in a church where the tabernacle has been moved down the hallway to Our Lord in Time Out, those are likely the churches where you're going to hear the most impassioned pleas for the Catholic Campaign for Human Development.
Absolutely.
It's the social gospel that will be proclaimed there.
That's right.
Bugnini, who designed the Novus Ordo Mass, he said you can't have the tabernacle in there because it distracts the people from the liturgical action, which kind of begs the question. Distracts them from what?
Yeah.
Something that's not Christ-centered?
Right.
That's what's implied there.
Right.
So,
Yep.
All right, Michael Hichborn, this has been great. People can find more of your work at lepantoinstitute.org.
Yes, they can.
And what else?
No, that's pretty much it. Or follow us on Facebook.
Facebook.
We are on Facebook, and follow me on Facebook too, because most of my stuff is on Facebook. I tried doing stuff on Twitter, but apparently I'm shadow banned on Twitter. So.
Are you?
Yeah.
It's been happening more and more. And then the reports are available at Lepanto Institute, right? And how do you find those on the site? Just because people are going to go over there.
There's a little tab at the top that says charity lists or charity reports. Just click that tab. It'll take you to a website with a list of all of the different charitable reports. A lot of our reports are also embedded in our articles. So if you click the blog, you'll be able to go to those articles as well.
Awesome. And I want to challenge everybody watching to get those reports, study those reports, know those reports, and also pass them on to clergy. There may be priests out there, deacons, who don't know this, like the bishop that Michael was talking about, and hopefully their jaw drops and they realize this is a problem, because we need more awareness on this. So, Michael, thanks for being on today. God bless you. I'd like to encourage everyone to do something very Lepanto. Michael's from the Lepanto Institute, and that is pray the rosary. The Battle of Lepanto was a battle against the Muslim Turks and Christian Europe. We were outnumbered. And under the leadership of Don Juan and Pope St. Pius V, we won that naval battle. You can see the ship right above Michael's head. That's it right there. And they won the battle, but they prayed the rosary, and they had most of Catholic Europe praying the rosary. They won that battle.
Right.
Pope Pius V started the Feast of Our Lady of Victory, which is October 7th, which became the feast day of Our Lady of the Rosary. Did I get that right, Michael?
Yes. October the 7th, yes.
Yeah, 7th, yeah. So Lepanto is the battle. Why'd you choose Lepanto, Michael? I mean, obviously.
Actually, it's kind of an interesting story. I hadn't even thought about it when I was trying to decide what I was going to do. I was working in American Life League, and we came to a crossroads where it was pretty clear that I was either going to have to go off and do something on my own, or we were going to go in a different direction at American Life League. And I spent 3 days talking and praying with my wife, trying to figure out what we were going to do. And that morning, I still hadn't really decided. I was driving into work. I was praying my rosary, and I just stopped. And I said, Lord, I have no idea what I'm doing here. I don't know what you want me to do. I need you to tell me, because I'm too dumb to figure this out. And in my mind, I got, okay, talk to your spiritual director and ask him what to do. And whatever he tells you, just do it. Great. I don't have to worry about this. It's all on my spiritual director's shoulders now. So I finished the rosary, got into work, talked to my spiritual director, and he says, look, Michael, I know you, I know your wife, I know your family. I want you to go ahead, and I think you need to go in a new direction. I said, okay. So I quit. And that night, my wife and I are talking about this. I'm kind of contemplating, what the hell did I just do? And I was praying, and I was just kind of talking to Our Lady, and I said, okay, this morning I made the decision based on the rosary. I asked our Lord what I should do, got the inspiration to quit, and so I'm going to turn to you, Our Lady, and ask you how to do this, and help me to run this, and help me to figure things out. And I said, why don't we start with, what do we call this thing? And in my mind, Lepanto Institute.
I like it.
And I thought, okay, Battle of Lepanto, naval battle. I said, my family history goes back for generations in the Navy, so I've got a long seafaring history in my family. And, battle won by the rosary. I mean, it worked out well. And so I thought, okay, that's great. And I said, well, okay, Mother, what does the logo look like? and again, in my mind, ship surrounded by a rosary, and the meaning. The meaning was the most important, because I was thinking about how the ship surrounded by the rosary, it was the naval battle at Lepanto. It was so the ship representing the naval battle. Recourse to the rosary is what brought about the victory. But today we are facing the same three crises that they were facing back then: Protestantism, heresy, and Islam. Mm-hmm. And it is recourse to the rosary today that is going to rescue the bark of Peter, now representing the ship, that is going to bring about the victory. And so I went, oh, wow, that's really great. So my wife was already asleep. The next morning, I got up early, and which never happens. She got up, and I'm making coffee, and she said, oh, you're up early. And I told her all about the little conversation that I had with Our Lady last night. And she said, well, you realize yesterday was October the 7th. So she said it was the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary. Was not even on my radar.
Wow.
Didn't realize it.
That's amazing. That's great. I'm the founder of the New St. Thomas Institute. We do online courses, Thomas Aquinas, philosophy, theology, apologetics, newstthomas.com if you want to check it out. But we also started our apostolate on October 7th based on the Rosary.
Kidding.
Yes.
That's awesome.
So we have that in common, October the 7th, Feast of the Rosary, beginning our apostolate. So people can support y'all, can find out more at lepantoinstitute.org, pardon me.
That's right.
And get those reports and spread that information. Pray the rosary. Be every day. Be a warrior. Yep, every day. I always say on the show, if you're not praying the rosary every day, you're just not with us. Our Lady of Fatima said, pray the rosary every day. As lay people, that's the least we can do, is spend 15 minutes about every day with our Lord, with Our Lady, meditating on the mysteries, praying those Hail Marys for the church, for our children, for our friends, for our family, for the whole world. So pray that rosary every day. Have hope. Work for change in our church, for true reform, to draw us closer to Christ as Redeemer, not merely as a bread king. And if you like this video, please like it on YouTube, subscribe to it, hit that little bell to get notifications of future episodes. And I spent this morning signing books to everyone who supports this channel on Patreon, so those will be going out today. And if you want me to sign some books, I'll sign them this next week too. You can find out more at patreon.com/Dr. Taylor Marshall. I'll put the link in the notes. So Michael Hichborn, thanks so much for being with us. Let's do it again.
Thanks so much for having me. I want one of those books.
All right, I'll send you one. All right,
Great.
Signing off, everybody.
God bless.